Welcome to Grid Live NASCAR Weekend Preview. Pennzoil 400 presented by Jiffy Lube at Las Vegas Motor Speedway. I'm Joe Sandiego. With me, Tanner Smith from thepitboxpress.com. Big thank you to our Patreon investors calling the show, Mark, Rob, David, and Matthew for investing in the Grid Network each and every month. You too can invest. Link in the video description. Super chat. I made coffee. Jason M leads the leaderboard. And of course, easiest way, subscribe, hit the bell icon, follow us across social media at Grid Network TV. And we have a busy weekend, Tanner. 9 races. I know right before we went on the air, we were talking about that wild supercar race weekend to start things off. Las Vegas is going to be the race to end the weekend. And for Christopher Bell, the hunt for 4 consecutive wins. That is the main story, and I feel that is the big story of the weekend, along with F1 season starting race. A lot of excitement for that. MotoGP again, Argentina Grand Prix, what Marc Marquez is going to do, but Christopher Bell, he won at Atlanta. He got the job done at Coda. Phoenix, amazing finish. He has to feel pretty good with everything he has done, his racing accomplishments, and right now, looking at DraftKings, Kyle Larson and Christopher Bell are both at plus 400. However, Jonathan Fields from the Racing Expert has found other sources that show Bell second at plus 425. Still, Tyler Reddick was in this plus 600, so it looks like a lot of folks anticipating just those two the big favorites for the Pennzoil 400. What signs in practice or qualifying will we be looking for from Christopher Bell to indicate that he is a contender for the race win?
Well, the obvious ones are finding yourself at the top of the practice and qualifying board. So even if he isn't exactly at the top of either of those, I do expect the 20 car to be somewhere in the top 10, whether it be in qualifying or practice. I think that's something Bell has failed to convert on when he comes to Vegas, is having that like true long run speed. Now, granted, a lot of that has to do with how NASCAR orients the stages to where you don't really have terribly long runs unless there's, a completely green third stage like we have seen in the spring from time to time. So it will be interesting to see kind of what his 10 and 20 lap averages end up looking like, if they even get to run that many laps of practice. As we know, NASCAR practice is kind of it's more of a loose definition of what practice actually should be. So yeah, I'll definitely be looking to see if he's able to put some fast times down on the qualifying or practice sheets. But ultimately, what I'm really looking for when I'm watching him specifically is to see if his car looks like it handles well. Bell is one of the best qualifiers in the field as far as next gen is concerned. He, I believe, leads the entire series since the next gen's been implemented in polls. So if he has a well-handling race car coming into the Sin City this weekend, I definitely think that he and Adam Stevens will be able to take as many gambles as they need to get that 4th straight win.
Adam Stevens, a key part in trying to get that 4 consecutive race wins. The weather in Las Vegas, Saturday we're seeing high 63 degrees, sunny. Sunday 71 degrees. I don't think that's going to be a big enough of a change. I think it's going to be really something where if Christopher Bell is fast on Saturday, starts towards the pole, he could be a big factor in the race. At the same time, the Toyotas are just so strong. I would be shocked if we don't have a cluster of Toyotas, 3 or 4 Toyotas in the top 8 positions. Overall, even the top 10. The way they're looking, especially after Chevrolet, we'll see Ford. I don't know about Ford. It seems like Penske's carrying that group lately.
Well, we can't forget that. I mean, I know it's a Penske affiliated car, but Josh Berry was in the top 5, top 10 all race long. So we're seeing a lot of improvement out of Wood Brothers that seems, at least to some people, and probably even to me, a little bit unexpected at this point of the season, considering how suboptimally they ran with Harrison Burton the past few years.
Yeah, Josh is making a big difference with that car, the Penske affiliation. Essentially, I count it as that fourth Penske team, but the historic Wood brothers, they'll love to have a good, solid race weekend. Get some forwards there, but I think the Toyotas are going to be really hard to beat. The one driver I'm watching for that I see is the biggest threat to snapping Christopher Bell's winning streak, his longtime competitor from Dirt, Kyle Larson. Of course, I would mention the favorite at plus 400. Larson has raced Bell so many times on dirt, the Chili Bowl, various dirt tracks, and of course the Cup Series. Larson at Las Vegas, his stats are impressive. 3 wins, 8 top 10s, 12, 8 top 5s, 12 top 10 finishes. Since he joined Hendrick Motorsports, he has won or finished second in the Vegas spring race. His just looks hard to beat in the spring race. And as I mentioned, DraftKings at plus 400. He seems to be the favorite. He won last year. Do you think he could be the person to deny Christopher Bell? Could we see a race where it's going to be Bell versus Larson up front all day?
I certainly think that is entirely possible. Obviously, Larson's record here, as you so eloquently pointed out, is extremely formidable compared to anybody in the Cup field outside of Joey Logano, who has, I believe, the most wins at Vegas at this point. But having said all that, I haven't really seen the speed out of the 5 car that I would really like to have seen thus far into the season. He was a relative non-factor at Daytona, which is not really surprising. He's not exactly strong at those tracks. He did show up towards the end of the Atlanta race and obviously was a major factor in the finish of that event, but even then, I didn't feel like he was one of the strongest 5 cars in that race. Then you had Coda, where he was nowhere to be found all day until he brought out a late caution for a wheel that unfortunately dislodged itself from the car and got 2 of their crew members ejected for the next couple of weeks. And then at Phoenix, I'm going to be honest, I was surprised to see him up in third at the end of the event with a chance to win on that final restart. He wasn't really anywhere to be found in that event either until the last couple of laps. So with all that said, we have seen Larson and Cliff Daniels be able to really figure it out here at Las Vegas. It seems to be like a true heat check for that team coming into the season oftentimes. And I definitely think that they should be a contender, but if you go back and look at last fall, where the temperature and everything was pretty much the same as it's going to be this weekend, they ran around the back half of the top 10 for most of the day and finished there. So it'll be interesting to see kind of coming out of practice and qualifying, seeing who really tops the charts. I'm really interested to see if Ford will have anybody in spitting distance of the Toyotas and Chevys, because really since the next gen era has started, the Fords have had traditionally a very rough start to this season. So Kyle Larson's definitely going to be somebody I'm looking for coming into this weekend, but I also wouldn't be surprised if they're a little bit lacking on pace, as this is our true first mile and a half of the season.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see what's going to happen with Kyle Larson at qualifying, because like you said, the pace doesn't seem to be there. The Toyotas seem to be the best vehicle. In the chat room, J-Dog, I would love to see Kyle Busch win. He needs one.
Yeah, Rowdy definitely needs a win. And I think it would be really beneficial for RCR to have a driver in the playoffs already week 5 of the season. And for Kyle Busch, that would be an instant confidence booster for him and that 8 team. They obviously have kind of lost their way over the past year and a half, 2 years, and not only finding your way back to victory lane in general, anywhere on the Cup schedule would be nice, but for it to be in Kyle Busch's hometown, I'm sure that would be an extremely hearty welcome home if he were to be the one to burn it down after 267 laps in the desert.
Yeah, that hometown win will be huge for him, and I think huge for that family. I know the Bush family, they've been super successful. I know Kurt's been out. He's starting to get back to racing, but we know Cup Series wise,
That's probably not happening
not
again.
going to happen. Kyle has had a rough 2024, so if he was to get a win there, I could see that just being a very popular win, which is interesting because if this was 4 years ago and he was still with Joe Gibbs Toyota, I think it was just still be just another Kyle Busch win. We expect that. We're at a point where Kyle Busch wins. Huge boost of confidence for everybody, a popular win, and I think a really feel good story, which I think we wouldn't be saying 4 years ago about Kyle Busch. Now, of course, going back to Larson, Kyle Larson, the favorite, Christopher Bell, amazing as the favorite, trying to get that fourth win in a row. If we see Kyle Larson win this race, and it is between him and Christopher Bell, those two, they've raced each other hard. They race each other pretty clean. Could this be a great rivalry the sport needs, Bell versus Larson, throughout the season?
As much as I would love for that to happen, I just don't think so. And it's more to do with how these two drivers have interacted to this point. They have been in a championship 4 together at this point. I think that we often forget that back in 2023, both of them made the championship 4, but there was clearly no like animus of any kind between the two of them. And as much as everybody in NASCAR circles wants to kind of pit them against each other, I really just don't think it's in their DNA to really have beef with one another. They seem to have a high deal of respect between each other. And frankly, that's not a bad thing. I know that in NASCAR, we really like to kind of like engineer conflict between two drivers when any sort of run-in happens. But with these two, I feel like if there would have been a rivalry of some kind, we would have already seen it. The same thing kind of goes with Larson and Tyler Reddick. They grew up together, they raced together, they made mistakes together, I'm sure, and got caught up in each other's mistakes a fair number of times, I'm certain. So I feel like if there would have been a rivalry, it would have already happened. It would have already been present. And I just don't feel like, organically speaking, we're going to be able to really formulate a rivalry between those two unless something like truly drastic were to happen, like one of them like straight up takes the other out to win a race, which I don't think is out of the question. We've definitely seen Kyle Larson clear up at Vegas a number of times, unfortunately, and it's led to differing results. But yeah, I just feel like if a rivalry between these two were to develop, there would have to be a true inciting incident for that to happen. And frankly, with how these two race each other, I just really don't see that happening, because I feel like if it would have happened, it would have happened at this point, and it hasn't. So I'm leaning towards no.
I would love to see not so much a feud between those two, but just something where these two drivers, they are the favorites week in and week out, and they're going to race each other hard, respectfully. And that's something I think Christopher Bell has said. Again, he races everyone as clean as he could. He feels he has a good amount of respect. Him and Kyle Larson, chili bowls, dirt tracks, they go back. It'll just be, I think, a great story of these two continuing their little racing, trying to beat each other on the top stage week in and week out. It's really hard, though, just because you have 36 cars, in theory, that could go out there and win. Teammates, such as the Hendrick teammate, the Joe Gibbs teammate. I just feel this could add a nice story that sometimes seems to be a bit missing because sometimes it is a bit too unpredictable. Whereas in other sports like F1, it's Max Verstappen and whoever the next contender for that championship. In the chat room, I feel like Hendrick Motorsports will do good in this race because they have two winners recently at the track. Alex Bowman, Kyle Larson. I know Bowman, as I believe it was Kyle Busch or Denny Hamlin that said he backed into that win. a couple years ago?
He did. I was there. He did. He like it's not a knock to say that you like kind of lucked into a win. They pitch strategy their way into a win. They took 2 tires on the overtime pit stop and got out in front of Kyle Busch, who had a 3-second lead over Martin Truex Jr. for 50 laps in that final stage. And then, unfortunately, an Eric Jones caution with 2 laps to go completely changed the complexion of the finish. So, no, that was absolutely valid. Like, Bowman was running 7th, I believe, at the time of that final caution. And granted, still got to give him his flowers for that victory, because he still held off a very hungry Kyle Larson, who wanted to make it 2 in a row that day after winning at Fontana the previous week. But as somebody who attended that race and knows exactly how that race played out, I can personally attest he definitely fell backwards into it. And again, I don't think there's any shame in that, but if people rightly call you out for always having that happen, then you got to approach it with the correct level of skepticism. Obviously, Alex Bowman hasn't lucked into every win that he's had. He's gone and taken them a lot of times, which I think is actually pretty impressive. You look back at his first one at Chicago, he drove up through the field and took that from Kyle Larson with 6 laps to go. At Fontana, he actually kind of dominated that race. People often forget that in 2020. In 2021, he obviously got ahead on that final pit stop at Dover. That put him ahead, but he still held on to that lead over the dominant car of the day in Kyle Larson. And, obviously you look at Martinsville that year where he kind of got into Denny Hamlin. I mean, he could have won that race cleanly. We don't know. But he still held on that final restart with a lot of hungry drivers behind him trying to make it into that championship round and held them all off. He kind of backed into the Pocono win that year where Larson blew a tire in the final corner, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, Bowman's worth his salt, I think, in the Cup Series, but there are definitely some extenuating circumstances to some of his wins that draw the ire of some people. And frankly, I don't think it's really fair to him, but I can tell you for sure that Las Vegas race, he definitely kind of lucked into it.
Yeah, that one, that was something, but like you said, a win's a win.
Of course.
We can't forget William Byron has a win at Las Vegas as well. So 3 out of the 4 Hendrick drivers got a win there. So Hendrick, that's a team to be watching. Of course, you're going to have the Hendrick drivers plus all the other charter drivers in the field, 36 entries in this race. They all want to steal the headline. They all want to say, I snapped Chris winning streak. See that we're coming to the 5th race of the year and we've only had 2 race winners. I can't remember last time, especially with this format of winners you're in, that has occurred. Some of the past winners you're looking at here, of course, as I mentioned, William Byron, 1 win, 3 top 5 finishes, 7 top 10s in Las Vegas. Joey Logano, he won here the last time we raced as we were in the playoffs. That got him into the championship round and essentially the championship. Bowman, as we talked about. Denny Hamlin, he was so close in Phoenix. I think he would love to just prove he still has the speed to get the win. Brad Keselowski, he needs something to turn his luck around. It has just been a brutal start. And as mentioned in the chat room, Kyle Busch, but last time he did it, 2009. Quite some time for Kyle Busch to win at Las Vegas. So if you're excluding Larson and Bell, because I felt we talked a lot about those 2 already, do you believe any of those past winners have a shot? Or are you looking at somebody to be getting their first win at Las Vegas?
I definitely think that everybody that enters into the field has a shot, so to speak. But out of the past winners I'm looking at here, I would say the person with the best shot is either Hamlin or Logano. I have not seen anything out of RFK Racing that would provoke me to think that they're going to contend this weekend. RCR, I need to see it on this kind of a high-speed oval before I really believe it, but I will say their pace at COTA definitely gave me a bit more of a sense that they are able to adjust into having a good car, especially with how they ended Phoenix last week. They kind of stayed in the mid pack in the 15th to 20th area most of the day, and then ended up in the top 10 towards the end and were rapidly gaining positions. It was pretty impressive, the performance Kyle was able to put on. So I would say I lean closer to Logano. Obviously, he didn't really win last year on pace. He won on strategy and had a little help from his teammate, but he's won on pace here many times, just not so much in the next gen era. I will say that Hamlin, I know that his most recent win is the 2021 fall race here, but he always shows speed at this track when he's able to make it to the finish. And I think that if we're basing this off of who I think could win, I definitely think Hamlin's probably in my top three. But out of the drivers that haven't won at Vegas, I definitely lean towards Tyler Reddick. He clearly had the second best, maybe the best car last spring, but he was just unable to get around Kyle Larson for any extended periods of time to really control the race and find out. But he had a very strong run going last fall, and it ended in a very, very crazy crash where he ended up flipping over. And I think that he might go from on his lid to in victory lane this weekend if he can put everything together with 2311. And I think it would be a really nice statement for that team amid all of the legal drama going on for them to get into victory lane pretty early. But I'd also not rule out Bubba Wallace. He's very strong here. And you obviously have their teammate Riley Herbst, who, though it's his first race here in Cup, he is a hometown kid and will want to put on for his hometown fans, much like he did when he won his first Xfinity race. So I wouldn't completely rule him out until practice or qualifying kind of tell us the tale of who is actually going to compete this weekend. So of the previous winners, Logano and Hamlin are definitely tops for me. I don't think Kyle Busch is completely out of the question, but if I had to look for a new winner, definitely look at Tyler Reddick.
I think Tyler Reddick, Denny Hamlin, those are two drivers on top of my list. Denny Hamlin, of course, a past winner here. That Toyota power, you got to then look at his driver, Tyler Reddick, also fast. But another driver I feel a little bit under the radar, Chase Briscoe. I got a hunch he could, especially he has a good qualifying effort. Mile and a half oval, that 19 team. I think they have to feel pretty good that this is our strength. We got Chase Briscoe. He knows how to win. He's done it at Phoenix, Darlington. Two pretty demanding tracks, especially Darlington. Too tough to tame. Las Vegas, high speed, the banking. I could see this potentially going to be a strong race weekend, and I wouldn't pick him as my pick a winner. I think I got another driver in mind, especially one that's going for another win, put it that way. But I would say Chase Briscoe is a driver to watch. If he could have a good finish at Las Vegas, it would not surprise me. I think it's just one of those deals, the nature of the season, how it starts. Daytona looks great. Then the penalty. We go to Atlanta. Oh, okay, Atlanta.
Got into a wreck, or had to cause a wreck, did not contend. Then you had Coda where they wrecked their teammate and then finished outside the top 10. And then you had last week where they got involved in a big one. So
yep.
not the hottest start for the 19 team, but I see where you're coming from. They definitely traditionally have had a lot of speed at the mile and a half. So, I mean, you can even look at Truex last year at a similar track to this in Kansas where he finished third and contended late in that race. So I definitely see where you're coming from. I don't know if I personally agree, but I definitely see the through line.
His best finish there, 2022, second race of the year, 4th place. But then that's where I think Stewart Haas started stumbling, because then outside the top 20 the rest of the time racing there at Las Vegas. Chase Briscoe, I think he's one to watch. As I mentioned, Denny Hamlin from the past winners, and I think Tyler Reddick could be a new surprise winner. The mile and a half ovals are truly the big indicators for the season of how well you're going to do, since there are the majority of the races at these intermediate tracks. The car was designed to give great racing products on this track, and it has delivered. Even though when you mentioned Fontana, I think how much I missed that track with this generation of car. Such a shame we lost that track. So that was brutal. So, but overall, we see how these teams are making these cars better and better. Where that first year, Fontana, I mean, we had it was Eric Jones contending for the lead. That was a big surprise for everybody, and everybody thought this would be revolutionary. We've seen it close the gap in some ways, but at the same time, you still had teams like Stewart Haas Racing fell behind. Chris Buescher has had some good runs, but I just feel like RFK is a little bit behind. When you look at some of those teams, what are some strengths, signs of being strong on these tracks, signs of weakness when it comes to racing on these intermediate mile and a half ovals? And overall, which teams do you think could be a contender week in and week out in the future?
So just to kind of tackle this question as best as I can here, I think that having speed at somewhere like Las Vegas, where finding speed is actually relatively easy in some regards. This isn't a one-lane track, folks. You can run pretty much anywhere, top to bottom, from the wall to the apron. So if you can't find speed trying to get close to the apron because your car's too tight, you can simply drive it closer to the wall. So it helps that tight condition because you're not having to crank the wheel as much. Or if your car is too loose because you're trying to carry it up towards the wall, you can take it down closer to the apron, because that way you won't be getting into the wall if you make a slight error or if your car kind of gets out from under you a little bit. Now, the things I'm looking for amongst the top teams right now, and I'm looking specifically at the 20 car, the 24 car, and the 12 car, because those to me have been the three best teams every week as far as how consistently they contend and find themselves up at the front. I know some people might be saying, what do you mean? The 12 car was nowhere to be found at COTA. Well, none of the Fords were, to be fair. Obviously, Chris Buescher was able to make his way up there, as was Noah Gragson, Zane Smith, I think. No, it was Gilliland there at COTA. Obviously, they made it there towards the end, but they ran 17th to 25th most of the day and took tires at the end where some guys didn't and were able to take advantage of that tire delta that they had. Now, with all that said, the things that I'm looking for are solid green flag pit stops, which unfortunately, again, we didn't really see a whole lot of those at Phoenix. We've gone 4 weeks and we've hardly seen any green flag pit stops. It's kind of crazy when you really contextualize it like that. I'm looking for sharp green flag pit stops. I'm looking for teams that are able to keep up with the racetrack, because at the end of the day, you need to see these teams that have the fundamentals down before you can really gauge how good they're going to be writ large. I mean, obviously we're going to have 31 more races after this one this weekend in Vegas. So trying to figure out if a team is going to have enduring speed throughout the rest of the season still going to be relatively difficult coming out of Vegas. But I would say that teams that are able to really get better as the race goes on, or teams that are able to really keep up with the racetrack and keep their cars up at the front, those are the teams that going into Homestead next week and then Texas towards the beginning of May, those are the teams that you're going to be looking at as contenders going into Darlington and the Coke 600. So if I were a fan trying to really pick a championship person right now, I would definitely look at the teams that are looking very strong. Obviously, Christopher Bell's amongst that mix. But the other teams, I feel like the 12 team has shown a lot of pace, but just don't have a whole lot of luck on their side right now. Obviously, last week with that engine failure, you could look at the broader Team Penske teams. Austin Cindric obviously made a very unfortunate error at Coda that cost him a race and a half worth of points. And then you have Josh Berry, who hasn't really had the results, but he's had the speed. I'm going to be looking at a lot of those teams that are in the top 10 or around the top 10 in the standings, such as like John Hunter Nemechek, and kind of see how they're going to be able to adapt to this much larger track. I think there's going to be a heavy emphasis on the broadcast to look at the Fords because, again, as we spoke about earlier, they haven't traditionally had speed coming into this kind of a weekend at an intermediate track. So, again, just to reiterate, I would look for the teams that are able to keep up with the track and come into the weekend with like a good setup and keep their cars up front, because I think it's kind of like how Spire came in last weekend. They had a lot of practice and qualifying strength, but they did not finish the race. Well, that's not true. McDowell finished the race several laps down, got the fastest lap. They have speed out of the box. They weren't really able to keep up with it. So definitely look for those teams that are able to really come into the track with a lot of speed and manage to keep it up. Teams that qualify well and then don't practice well, those are the teams that I wouldn't really have a whole lot of confidence in.
A lot of great points, and I think especially that example of Spire last weekend. Came out of the gate, qualifying, wow, they're fast. Carson Hocevar, Justin Haley, they didn't finish the race. Michael McDowell had that issue with a blown tire. It's crazy looking at the standings. He is 5 above the cut line. You take away those 2 Xfinity fastest lap points, that would only be 3. So might be playing the point game already. We'll be seeing if we're going to be playing that clip from the Gay Racing podcast quite often if he keeps getting these fastest lap awards. But you bring up a lot of great points, and especially what the teams could do in chasing that setup of the car as the track is evolving, changing. And I think Chris Buescher, that team, I think it has to be one to look at. The entire organization of Hendrick, Gibbs, I mean, they're the top of the top. Really curious about Kyle Busch. I think this could really indicate where is that RCR team. Is it they have potential, or are they just Kyle Busch is just driving the heck out of that car the last few weeks, and now the mile and a half we might be seeing a different side of how it'll go. Ricky Stenhouse Jr., I'm very curious about this team. Single car team. He has put themselves still in the top 15, but I got to be honest, I don't have the confidence that that team could keep up with the evolving track, the pit crew, and to be honest, I mean, sometimes the driver doesn't make the brightest move either.
Not to dig on Hayek, but I'm going to be completely honest. I don't see that team being in the top 16 come next week.
I mean,
just being realistic, I just don't see it. John Hunter, I doubt it, but he might be able to. McDowell, I think it's impossible to tell. They've had speed pretty much everywhere, like as a team, Spire has, but I feel like everybody 13th up makes a lot of sense. Everybody below that, probably not going to be there next week. So obviously we'll have to see how it plays out, but that's just my projection here. You obviously have some of the guys up here like Ross. Gilliland's had a pretty okay campaign thus far. Carson Hocevar shown a lot of speed, just not really had the results to back it up. So, yeah, it's race 5. The points look kind of funny right now. That's just kind of how it goes.
Amazing. It's going to be quite interesting to see what happens at Las Vegas, this mile and a half oval. Since 2020, 3 times the Vegas race, either the spring or the fall, has gone into overtime. So it's not exactly the most common occurrence, but this year, half the races have done that. Granted, they were Daytona and Atlanta. We call them the drafting tracks, more chaos. But even last weekend, a very late caution. But the prior caution before that, just as William Byron was starting, well, we were hoping the first green flag pit stops of the year. Bubba Wallace has a brake rotor crashes out. The green flag pit stops doesn't happen, and William Byron fell victim of pitting early. Seeing this trend, but granted, we are in the first mile and a half oval, do you anticipate teams will be a bit hesitant to be that first team to, okay, we're in the third stage, we need to make this pit stop. Let's go ahead and do that to get the fresh tires and the advantage, because you could do that, but then here comes a caution and it's back in the pack.
I don't think so. I don't think that you can really come into a race weekend being concerned that a caution could come out at some time. The only time that you know a caution's going to come out are at the end of stage 1 and the end of stage 2. And you can probably almost bank on one coming towards the end of the race. With that said, I don't see any of these teams coming into the weekend with any sort of hesitation on what their pit strategy is going to be. A lot of that stuff is kind of formulated literally days in advance, between, different meetings you have at your race shop and driver discussions that take place. So if it were me at the top of the pit box, that kind of stuff really wouldn't concern me until I'm already in the moment, and then I would worry about it. But you don't really know how the race is going to play out. I run a weekly newsletter every week that kind of tries to chart out what the average race over the last 10 looks like. And I have been right on occasion about when the final caution is going to come out when you base it off of the averages, but that usually only happens at like Talladega. So it's really not an exact science. Larry McReynolds will pop in there every now and again, coming into like the last 50 laps of a race. They'll be like, well, Larry, what do the trends tell you? And then Larry Mack will come on there and be like, well, I'll tell you, every last spring race in the next gen era comes out with about 7 laps to go. He'll say something like that, and then a caution either won't come out and the trend is busted, or a caution comes out right around then, and then everybody's like, oh, well, Larry's trends are absolutely correct. So, yeah, if it were me, I really wouldn't pay attention to this pit stop could ruin my team's race. You kind of just have to adapt on the fly and kind of have to let the cards fall where they may. And at a place like Las Vegas, letting the cards fall where they may kind of comes second nature.
It's going to be very interesting, Tanner, just to see how these teams, because like you said, I was thinking about that right before you said about the trends. Let's go to Larry McReynolds and he'll tell us. I sometimes feel the broadcasts, they're just almost too often. Oh, is there going to be a caution? Is there going to be a caution? Here comes the trends of when the cautions. I don't think there's any track where Larry McReynolds going to say, well, the trends show there's going to be no more caution, so we're just going to enjoy the race. I just don't know which track that will be.
Well, we've already passed the window.
So, yeah, I'm hopeful we do see some green flag pit stops at this race, because I just feel like that is a missing element of the competition, the strategy. And I get it, you can't predict Bubba Wallace having a brake rotor failure, crashing into the wall. But these stage cautions, sometimes they just, okay, everyone's in the same box. We're going to go to the end of the stage, cut it in half. That just leaves the third stage too. And then the caution comes out and it puts a squash on that too. So we'll be watching. I think, especially since we're seeing it's going to be in the 70s, so not exactly the hottest. If tire wear maybe is a bit more prevalent, since there's going to be a little bit more grip, if that first car does make that pit stop, will they start having a huge advantage or it'll be a minimal advantage? And then you're going to just see others. Okay, well, let's just stay out a little longer and then make their stop. But by then, it'll be interesting to see what happens. We talked about this earlier. The past winners here, signs of which teams to really be seen as a contender, not a pretender where they just qualify fast, but then they're just nowhere in practice, nowhere in the race. We brought up some of the names like Carson Hocevar, Josh Berry, who's, like you said, off to a good start. John Hunter Nemechek comes to mind, and of course he's a little bit trendy on social media because he's going to have the Backstreet Boys cars brought back. Sounds of the 90s for me during the week. If we see, especially those three drivers, which, as you mentioned, they've had some lousy results, but they've had some good ones. Surprisingly, John Hunter Nemechek, I mean, he had a couple top tens where Barry Hocevar, some good races here and there. But if we see a day where nothing too crazy, standard amount of yellow flags, but good, clean racing, and they're in the top 10, how much do you move them from essentially being a pretender to a potential contender?
So I took a look quick at Carson Hocevar's 3 Cup starts at Vegas, and it's kind of a mixed bag. Last spring, he was able to qualify 14th and finish 15th, but in the fall, he showed a major pickup in his ability to not only start the car, but unfortunately his finish wasn't as good. So as far as he's concerned, I remember how well he ran at Homestead last year. He drove his way into the top 10 very quickly in stage 1 and stayed there the rest of the day. So I actually would move him into possible contender right now if he performs well at Vegas. I think he could contend even as soon as next week. Now, if John Hunter Nemechek gets a top 10 and runs roughly around there all weekend, Legacy Motorsport is putting the whole garage on notice that they are here to play this year. And that could start as soon as Eric Jones at Darlington here in the next couple of months. So, yeah, you definitely got to look at those teams if they're able to have a really strong run this weekend as being here to stay. I mean, Las Vegas last got repaved in March of 2007. That was 18 years ago. They ran 2 races a year from 2018 onward, so the tire degradation should be pretty above moderate, almost into high. I wouldn't say high yet because it was one of those SMI repaves of the mid to late 2000s, kind of like Charlotte, where it took eons to age, but we're finally starting to see tire wear really play a factor again, which is really, really nice. And I think someone like Josh Berry, who has had a fair amount of success here in Xfinity, I think you could see him have a really good day. And like I said, I think if any of those 3 that you mentioned are able to have a really good, consistent top 10 run come Sunday, the sky's the limit for either of those 3 teams, because I think it takes a lot out of a race team to be really strong at Vegas and have a really good, consistent car, because the track is changing so much and you're constantly trying to find grip anywhere on the racetrack. So, yeah, I think the sky's the limit for any of those 3 teams if they're able to get a top 10 on pace this weekend. And I'm going to be honest, if Hocevar or Berry win this season, I really wouldn't be surprised. But if Nemechek comes out of this year in the playoffs and with a win, I would be I would be profoundly shocked. But I would be pleasantly shocked as well, because, God, the last 2 years for that team have just been so miserable. And, we don't often see Jimmy Johnson in such, turbulent waters like this. So it will be really nice for not only Nemechek, who had such an embattled 2024, to come out in 2025 and get a win relatively early and get himself locked into the postseason, especially with how much Johnson has, donated time to helping raise John Hunter as a driver these past couple of seasons. So, yeah, definitely look for all three of these guys throughout the weekend just to kind of chart where they run and how well they progress or regress throughout the race. But if any of them come out of here with a top 10, you got to say the sky's the limit.
If Josh Berry gets a top 10, I feel like my thinking is more finally we're seeing something from the Wood brothers. They got the chemistry going with a great driver, the Penske equipment. This is where they belong. Hocevar still is a surprise, but like you said, I think he showed last year some potential, especially that top 5 finish at Watkins Glen. It's just a matter of putting together a perfect race, which that's where I think Spire still, I wouldn't say maybe lack the confidence, but lacks the experience level of putting together a good race of pit stop after pit stop, keeping the car up front as the track evolves. And John Hunter Nemechek, that will be the biggest surprise. I know when he first came back with Legacy, I made a bold prediction he was going to get one win. That didn't happen. I should have done it this year, but we'll see if he brings that car to victory lane. Some point this year, I don't know what the internet is going to do if he was to somehow win this weekend with that Backstreet Boys car. But yeah, it's interesting. Just the thought that Toyota, we said, is the best car. And you brought up the point of if he is in the top 10, Eric Jones has run good here too. He could be a contender. Then we got Homestead, lots of grooves, great track. Later on, Darlington, it might have that date circle, especially that 43 car and that 43 team. So those are some of the teams. And one team, they've had some good, they had a good run at Coda out of all places, but then it just seems bad luck being caught up in crash. Noah Gragson, he was part of Legacy's Motorclub's first lousy season, being replaced halfway through the year. Then he gets with Stewart Haas Racing. Okay, Stewart Haas Racing, they're at that level where he had a couple good runs here and there, but nothing really. But I feel it seems like he has the speed, but he just has not put together that finish yet. Besides Coda, which was the surprise of it all. It's like he's not exactly a road racer. I mean, we literally saw him eat it at Portland that first year when he was on the front straightaway and just, here he comes. This ain't going to be good. And sure enough, it wasn't. He really did not like the track after that. So I'll be curious to see how Gregson's going to perform. If he could get a top 10, that has to be a huge confidence boost for him and everyone Front Row Motorsports.
He'd be replicating his performance from last spring where he got a top 10.
Exactly. So
in the team.
Interesting to see what he could do. And of course, all that's going to be Sunday, but it's today. Time for pick a winner. These are the standings before race 1 of the Repco Supercar Series. So I believe Matt, Kobe, myself, did you pick Brock Feeney for race 1?
I didn't pick for race 1 because I didn't know it was happening last night. But I did pick Feeney for race 2, which is tonight, and I will be tuned in for that one. I did manage to catch up on that race this morning, and if for those of our viewers that haven't been able to watch it yet, definitely recommend. It was only 20 laps, so it'll be a breeze to get through, and there was a safety car in the middle of it, so you'll literally have it split in half for you.
A lot in that race. That was something else.
Looking forward to a few more this weekend from them.
Oh yeah, busy weekend. 9 races for pick a winner. Let's start off with we'll do the second race of Supercar since that'll be tonight.
Sure.
But let's start with the one we've been talking about the most, Las Vegas Motor Speedway. For the Pennzoil 400 presented by Jiffy Lube, who do you see winning the race?
you mind pulling up the odds for me there on the side? Because
Of
I want to make sure I'm quoting proper here. All right. So I could go with Kyle Larson. I could go with Christopher Bell. I could even go with Tyler Reddick, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to actually go with Tyler Reddick's teammate. I'm going with Bubba Wallace this weekend. Now, granted, I need to point this out. We haven't seen the cars hit the track yet, so this could age very poorly. But I think Bubba Wallace is actually a very strong driver at these 1.5-mile cookie cutter style tracks. He obviously got his second career win at Kansas back in 2022, and he showed a lot of muscle there in the previous iteration of the Camry in 22 and 23, including winning actually, he did not win a stage, but either way, he performed very well at Vegas in the spring of 2023, and he was performing very well here in the spring last year prior to that unfortunate wheel issue that they had that they couldn't get the tire off the car. I'm going to hope that weird off the wall outlier issue isn't going to befall that 23 team again, and they'll actually get a full race in. And I feel like with Charles Denick on top of the pit box, that they'll have a much stronger race all the way through, and they'll find themselves in contention and hopefully in victory lane to really put to bed those doubts that they've had of changing crew chiefs after moving on from Booty Barker as he moved into a comp director role.
As a good pick, I like the idea of Bubba Wallace. I mean, he seems to be good at these tracks. 2311, Toyota, all the ingredients are there. But I think for me, I'm going to go with Toyota, but I have to stick on board the Christopher Bell Express. He got me the point last weekend. I would love to see a driver do 4 in a row. Been quite a long time since Jimmy Johnson done it. Christopher Bell, that is my pick for the Pennzoil 400. Supercar Series, race number 2. Who are you thinking when it comes to that?
I'm going to be taking Feeney for that one. He had a pretty solid gap on the field when it came to qualifying time, but I will say Cam Hill, very surprising showing in the first race last night. And I could see Cam Hill having a really solid run again today. Qualified second for this round, and I don't know, maybe he can mix it up and get the W. But another driver to look out for was who was it in that race? They were driving a Ford Wood. Was it Ryan Wood? Is that gentleman's name?
Ryan Wood, I believe so.
Yes, he had a very strong performance in that race. He was able to really claw his way through the field, as was Cam Waters, our point leader in that division. But yeah, Ryan Wood, I mean, if he can claw out of the midfield one race, I'm sure he can do it twice. So if the race gets kind of crazy, maybe look out for him.
I mean, he's 4 races into the Supercar Series, so that'll be a impressive run by him. But yeah, that was really good what he did that first race. I'm going to go, I was very much thinking Brock Feeney again, but I think I'm going to go with his teammate, Will Brown, Red Bull Ample Racing. I mean, the Chevrolets, they got the win. I think Will Brown's ready to respond with a win himself and get his title defense going again. But it's going to be a lot of fun. That track works great for F1 and the Supercar Series. And of course, we'll be following a very busy weekend of racing here for all of us here. As I mentioned, 9 races, 8 remaining. Brock Feeney won the first one. So plenty of points online for Pick a Winner. Be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon. And across social media, you can find the Pick a Winner with the hashtag Pick a Winner at Grid Network TV. Saturday, F1 pre-race. We'll be previewing the Formula One race after the qualifying session at noon Eastern on Saturday. Then the wrap-up show, we're going to wrap up NASCAR F1, IMSA, the 12 hours of Sebring, so much racing. It's going to be really fun to see how everything goes. And of course, one of the big things, encourage everyone invest in the Grid Network. Colin, the show, Mark, Rob, and David and Matthew have been investing in us for quite some time. We appreciate their investment, helping us stay on the air, keep the website going, and hopefully some more driver interviews throughout 2025 right here. And the Super Chat, Buy Me a Coffee leaderboard, Jason M. leads at 5 total. That's it. For Tanner Smith, I'm Joe Samdiego. Thank you for watching today's program. We'll see you next time and enjoy the races.